because we live in a world where it's so easy to start new things. We launch projects, we pick up habits, we're constantly setting new goals. There's an entire culture built around doing more, hyper productivity. And often that's what's actually getting in the way of what allows us to be our best selves. And it's actually what underpins burnout. So many leaders think that resilience is about.
Hawa, welcome to Resilient Entrepreneurs Podcast, coming to us all the way from Ghana today. We're so excited to have this literal worldwide podcast happening. Thank you for being here. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here with both of you today, Vicky and Laura. Thanks.
Oh, awesome. Well, let's kick it off with my favorite question, which is if I were to hand you a magic wand today, what change would you make in the world?
Okay, so this is a beautiful question. And it was so interesting because my masculine side was kind of ready to be like, do this and do this and do this. And I kind of had to stop and realize that the actual antidote that I think I would like to bring to people is actually this ability to help us stop cycles that keep us stuck. Because we live in a world where it's so easy to start new things. We launch projects, we pick up habits, we're constantly setting new goals. There's an entire culture built around doing more, hyper productivity. And often that's what's actually getting in the way of what allows us to be our best selves. And it's actually what underpins burnout. So many leaders think that resilience is about constantly adding more, right? Like more mindfulness, more routines, more practices. But real resilience actually comes from shedding the weight of burnout first so that you have space to receive what's new and what's actually going to help you bring more calm and sustainability into the work that you do. So I really think it comes down to putting a stop to the patterns that end up draining us so that we can make room for strategies, habits, and leadership that really help us drive mission driven success in the social impact sector.
Okay, I love what you said so much because it's such a different shift of mindset. Because you're right, I feel overwhelmed when I constantly hear everyone saying, you need more mindfulness, you need to add some meditation in your life, you need to be journaling, you need to be doing this. And I feel like there's all this stuff I need to be doing and I should be doing, and I cannot find the capacity to add more in. But
Mm-hmm.
you're saying, wait, there's some stuff you need to stop first to make space for that. That is a great mind shift.
And I mean, it's like if we were talking about healing the physical body, right? Like if you had sprained an ankle running and you go to see a doctor or a physician and they tell you, okay, great, like ice your ankle, here's some ibuprofen, etc. And then you say, great, I'm going to do all of that and then still go for a run tomorrow. You're not going to heal. We all know that, right? It's like there actually is a period that is required for us to slow down and review, perhaps even eliminate some of the patterns that have gotten us to this point to actually say, okay, what is required to help me get back into a state of balance? And then from that place of balance, what do I want to reintroduce? What do I want to change? Maybe you realize that running isn't the best form of exercise for you and you want to start strength training so that your ankles are less susceptible to sprains, right? And that to me, I think, is the flavor and the attitude that is missing sometimes in leadership in the name of stability and structure and routine, which can be beautiful things. Don't get me wrong. I am a creature of habit. However, I think we sometimes forget that those routines can actually just become limiting at some point and they end up blocking our ability to be creative and to grow.
Yeah, I feel like, and it's such an entrepreneurial mindset thing to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and new and building. And there's a weight of technology and AI and all these things that are coming into our lives now that feels like even heavier. And there's and there's such an abundance of information and sharing and gurus and all these, but it feels like a huge amount of overwhelm right now. I know I personally feel that way. So I'm sure there's so many other people out there listening right now that are absolutely feeling that way too. And burnout, I think, is something that we don't understand enough until we're in it. Right? So define burnout for anyone who's like, am I like, aren't really sure what it feels like, what it means. Give us a little like understanding of the depth of what that wall actually feels like.
Yeah. And I love so much that you ask the question in this way because I think we all have different interpretations and boundary points when we actually go, okay, in this moment, I'm willing to acknowledge or maybe admit a little bit that I'm burnt out, but it manifests in so many different ways, right? And so I'm happy to break that down a little bit based on how I see it. So I think in a knowledge economy where so many of us are using our minds and logic in the day to day work that we do, one of the first ways that burnout shows up that we often dismiss is brain fog and trouble with decision making. And it's that overwhelm that you were even talking about, Laura, that sense of just there's too much stimulus. I'm being way overstimulated and it's getting in the way of allowing me to focus on what's mine versus what's other people's. What are the real priorities for me? Where do I add the most value? Right. And I think I know for me, for several of my friends, it's very easy to just take that as status quo. We've normalized having headaches, we've normalized feeling drained and exhausted, right? And often our environments and the urgency and the uncertainty of the world that we live in today, whether it's political, economical, whether it's, it has to do with survival in certain environments. We're all trying to strategize the logic model that's going to get us the result that we want. And that can be very draining because we're trying to exert a type of control that we will never really have, but we're trying to convince ourselves that we can. And so I think that's probably one of the first things to recognize and not to freak out over, but to also not dismiss, right? To just hold awareness and hold space for that. And then next you start to feel the drain, the overwhelm. And I call this I can't get out of bed on the weekend to do something that I love or spend time with people that I love. And that's when I start to notice it, that in these windows where I've made time for rest, I've made time for myself, the actual energy to step forward and do things that nourish me and that fill my cup again, I'm just like, no, I don't even have the energy or the interest or the willingness to do that. And so this is when work often starts to bleed into personal family time. And I think this is sometimes where the work life balance conversation comes up because people are like, I prioritize my energy towards my work and my job and what supports my family and what's part of my identity for many of us. And then when it's time to take a step back and smell the flowers, the actual energy and motivation that I need to do those things has been suctioned off in that direction. Then next, we come to the physical discomfort, which can be pain, sickness, realizing that in a month you've had a couple of infections and you're like, oh, it's the season that I'm in. We'll get through it. That's normal. 5 other people in the office were unwell too. So it's nothing to pay attention to if I notice that I'm not feeling well or I'm having certain aches and pains. And we can be very good at dismissing or, oh, my legs are sore today. Oh, I think I walked an extra 20 minutes yesterday. That must be why. I'll be fine. But you also know that that's not normal for your body and the way that you recognize your body. So I also think a big part of burnout is body awareness, which is, again, not something that in the logic model of life, most of us are taught to pay attention to, right? Most of us are taught follow the script, read the book, follow what the gurus say and dismiss any other signals or information you're getting that hasn't been proven or fact checked or verified, right? There's a willingness to dismiss what we know. Um, and then, I alluded to this earlier, but I think that piece around disconnection from purpose, especially in mission driven work, when you actually start to feel like, what is the point? Why am I doing what I'm doing? Do I feel that my work is valued? Do I feel like the actual approach that I'm using to do my work matters to people and is helping people in a way that is really going to bring forth change and transformation? Am I slapping a band aid on a bigger issue? Those questions of disconnection start to come up when we don't have physical energy, mental energy, right? Because it starts to drain us emotionally. And then I think the bottom tier, when most people start to realize something is wrong, is when team conflict comes up. When teams really start having that kind of implosion where people are undermining each other, people are backstabbing each other, you can't speak your truth, truths that you feel are more or less objective. You're just like, I don't feel safe to say that here in this space, in this environment, with this leader. When you start losing trust with your team, and those are all those breakdowns in communication that we see, that we hear about. And these are just many ways that burnout can express itself. And I think it's really a question of, at what point do we recognize it so that we can start to correct and shift some of the habits and patterns that keep us in those systems. Even the little ecosystem of burnout that I just described, it's something that starts inward and often isn't noticed or recognized until it appears outside of ourselves, right? Until we recognize a tension or a breakdown. And so for me, it calls into this bigger question, exactly as you said, are we able to ask ourselves, do we have the tools to do that inward recognition and that inward validation? Because again, before we started recording, we were talking a little bit about how focused our world is on what's going on externally, right? And the striving to prove, to be more, to be productive, and all of that. And all of that is often a reflection. Like, we usually don't give ourselves permission to feel success until somebody else says it. Oh, you're on the Forbes 40 under 40 list. Oh, okay, now I've arrived, right? Okay, you've hit X amount of revenue in your business. Okay, now I've arrived and I'm doing okay. But every day that you don't hear that is a day that you're telling yourself, well, then I need to keep going because I haven't done enough. If someone or something outside of me isn't there to recognize it first before I give myself permission. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges with burnout, because most of us, if we were writing in our journals to ourselves at night, dear diary XYZ, right? I'm sure a lot of our frustrations or doubts or uncertainties or discomforts would come out on the page. And they usually come out to our loved ones, to those who are close to us when we're venting, right? But the question is, are we willing to recognize that energy as something that we can work with in order to change? Or do we feel stuck in the status quo of how things are and how things have been?
Yeah, getting stuck in that space, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is very common for a lot of people. And what do? We distract ourselves, we just push through,
Mm-hmm.
we just, something else comes up and our attention is just turned to that. And we just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. I remember a few years ago hitting a wall.
Mm-hmm.
And it was such a shock to me because I'm a driven person and I was really on like this, driven path. And there was just a day when I woke up and I literally could not function other than, basic survival needs.
Mm-hmm.
Like that was it. Work, I couldn't even open my computer. I couldn't focus. I couldn't think. I couldn't talk to another person other
Mm-hmm.
than just getting my kids off to school. I really couldn't do anything. And it was such a shock to me because that's not the type of person I am. I'm so driven and I'm like always been a push through, resilient type of person. And it was a shock. And I had to really take a step back and have a look within and go, what's going on? And it took me 2 days to just be able to start coming back to myself. And that's when I personally started paying a lot more attention to burnout and what this feels like and how to prevent it and avoid it again in the future. And
Mm-hmm.
it's interesting you brought up the brain fog because I had a serious case of brain fog about a year and a half ago, and I didn't know what to attribute it to. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, what is going, like, it was so strange to feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
And it is just like this, your thinking is just not clear, and you feel like you can't speak clearly. And here I am, a podcast host, not being able to speak clearly. It was a little frustrating. And it kind of got through it. And the only one thing I really changed in my life was I added an extra hour of sleep to my night, because I figured it must just be
Mm.
sleeping enough. And it did. It really did help. But now, reflecting on it in this conversation, I think I was definitely heading towards burnout if I wasn't already on that path.
Yeah.
With all the overwhelm of what's going on in the world, with all of that, absolutely, my brain is always ticking along. And I think I just needed to like slow it down, take a little. So I think I need to put a little more effort into, this exactly what we're talking about, and paying a little bit more attention. So, what are some solutions? What are some things that people should, you already said to stop, slow down, and sort of take
Mm-hmm.
sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Stock of what's going on. But
Mm-hmm.
what else do you recommend people, leaders, entrepreneurs, people who are feeling kind of that first stage of, oh, is this burnout? Because maybe this conversation is making them wonder, oh, maybe I am sick 3 times in the last month. I should think about.
Yeah, I think this is a great question, Lauren. I really appreciate the example that you shared because you even said something really beautiful where you said, I had kept pushing and I was resilient. And I think it's even that definition of unpacking why we see resilience as meaning I do more, I take on more, as opposed to resilience meaning what would sustainability look like? Right? Resilience is being if I'm going to run a marathon for the next 10 years in my business, what would my day-to-day look like to be able to get to the 10-year finish line versus saying in this year I want to be able to hit 5K on a 10-year journey, right? And what situations am I putting myself in because I'm believing that I need to hit that 5K to get whatever sense of validation, to be enough, to be worthy. And so for me, I think it really starts with looking at what I've termed these sort of burnout masks, because they really help us understand in different situations and scenarios which unhelpful coping patterns we are relying on in order to make it through the day and say, yeah, I'll just do that and then it'll be fine. And like next week, I'll figure it out and I'll bring more balance. Right. And so some of these masks are kind of aligned with the notion of, and I was just thinking about this morning. I was like, oh, it's all kind of connected, but fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Right. So, um, for those who are unfamiliar with those terms, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are sometimes ways that we react or respond when we're in high stress situations in order to feel safe and like we are going to survive and be okay enough to see another day. And in leadership, many of us do this, many of us have learned to do this, and it comes from much more than just your the work experience that you've had. Like I even argue that it goes back into, epigenetics and family patterns and socialization. But to not get too deep into that right now and to sort of just talk about these four masks, right? I like to look at them from the perspective of perfectionism and people pleasing, because that's how these elements really showed up in my life and where I had to take a step back and ask myself, why am I doing what I'm doing? And why do I believe what I believe in order to be enough and be worthy and be accepted in the work that I do? So, to just give folks a little bit of context around this so that you can help recognize and spot some of these patterns, I would say that if you're in fight mode, you are coming off as a bit of a realist. And this is someone who has used perfecting and perfectionism as a way of gaining control and as a way of saying if I can be perfect and do everything exactly the way it needs to be done and meet expectations, people will be happy with me. And that is what is going to ensure my success. I will continue to grow. I will continue to gain authority. based on being able to have a sense of ultimate control. And so these people are often fighting any sense of rest, fighting any sense of slowdown, fighting any sense of uncertainty in their leadership in order to attain that. So that's the first one with fight. Those who might
Can
find
relate.
themselves, your hands up. Oh, I've definitely
Immediately
been there.
relate.
Subscribe to that.
Uh-huh.
With flight mode, so flight tends to describe someone who would run away in a situation. And so, in my definition, that is the hero mask. And as the hero, you take on perfecting solo as a way of avoiding mistrust and conflict with other people. So you like to be the person that says, I'll do it. I can handle that. I don't need help. You guys don't worry about that. No, I don't really want to have to involve you and have you taint my vision of what's to come. I'll handle it. I'll do it. I don't know. I don't really want to get other people involved. And again, that is a way of holding on to control, right? And it's the idea it's that phrase, if you want something done well, you have to do it yourself. How many of us have heard that growing up and internalized that if I want things to go well, and if I want the logic model to play out perfectly towards success, towards the results that I want, I have to take it all on. And so you tend to get leaders who actually are not growing and building their teams and getting the support that they actually need because they're trying to hold on tightly and maintain their sense of control and correctness, if I can put it in those terms. Then we come next to freeze, which means you just kind of stand still in place when you're in a contentious situation and you find it difficult to take any sort of action. And I call this the innocent mask because this is an individual, and I will speak for myself when I say this because I've definitely felt this mask come up in my own leadership. But it's where your own sense of self worth is quite low. And so you hide your real needs as a way to protect yourself because you fear that if you are actually vocal and vulnerable about what you need, people are not going to meet you where you're at. People are not going to accept you, and people are going to dismiss you. So instead of actually speaking up and using your leadership to advocate the wholeness of a human being, to talk about your emotions, to say, like, hey, team, I need to set some boundaries around getting an extra hour of sleep, Laura, for example, right? That kind of leader might say, it's not okay for me to do that. It's not okay for me to be a person who has needs and potentially risks looking like the leader who has it all together. And so instead, I am just going to stand in place and not call or draw any attention to myself. And again, that can be challenging because these leaders don't necessarily communicate the full spectrum of what it is to be human. And if you're not willing to actually look at that and offer that to yourself first, it becomes very difficult to offer that to other people and to have compassion for your team, right? And to navigate uncertainty with the team if you're not willing to do that for yourself first. And then lastly, we have fawn. And fawn is typical people pleaser territory. And I call that mask the saint. And again, this is where low self worth in terms of, one's perceived ability to get things done pushes them to be a yes person. Because again, if they can say yes and be willing to meet whatever needs and demands of other people, that's where they get their external validation. And many caretakers find themselves in roles like this, where being able to take care of people and meet their needs very well, more than you're meeting your own needs, allows you to be seen as a person who it allows you to be seen in a very positive light, even when your own needs are being diminished. So I think it's important for leaders to be able to recognize when and where they see themselves in some of these masks, and to recognize that you might wear a certain mask with your peers You might wear a certain mask with people that you supervise. You might wear a certain mask with people who supervise you. There's so much fluidity to all of this. And it all comes down to us believing that we're going to be able to protect ourselves and, maintain an image of who we are and our identity and what we bring to the table so that people continue to value us in whatever way we're used to being valued.
That was so that was and like you're saying, and I'm glad you said it at the end, that sometimes it can be fluid, because I don't want to say that I'm any one of them completely and not the others, because I've
Mm-hmm.
definitely seen myself in so many different, and like you said, different situations or maybe with different groups of people. But I definitely hear you that it's so important for the leader, whether you're just leading a small business and you're the solo entrepreneur, but you're working with clients, or you're leading a team as the CEO of a business or in any leadership position, to be, I think, authentic and sort of allow your team to also be so, because then it allows for communication. Because I
Mm-hmm.
think when a team is fearful of saying, hey, I'm sick, or hey, I have a sick parent or a sick child, or I'm dealing with this, or I'm going through this health scare or challenge or whatever, when they're scared to bring up the things that make them look less than the superstar,
Mm-hmm.
that they want to present themselves as, to therefore have their needs met, like being paid their salary and everything else. When
Exactly.
there's fear around being authentic, it's gonna cause eventual breakdowns in teams, and
Mm-hmm.
it has to start with the leader,
Mm-hmm.
right? So being the leader is there's so much more responsibility than just dictating what needs to be done. Actually, how you're what I'm hearing from you is like how you're showing up is going to help how your team shows up, which improves the environment for everybody. Am I
Absolutely.
am I am I
Yeah.
on the right direction there?
Yeah, absolutely, Laura. I love that.
That's good.
And how much of this question about recognizing burnout and getting intervening quickly um, comes down to gender? You discussed at the outset that you had a masculine answer for the magic wand, and then your feminine answer was more about rest and reset. How much of this plays out?
Hey there, sorry for the interruption, but if you're a woman entrepreneur ready to raise your profile, expand your reach, and start being seen as the expert you already are, we have a challenge for you. Vicky and I have created a free guide called the LinkedIn to Latte Method. Check it out in the link below. It's designed especially for women who are done playing small and are ready to attract opportunities, clients, and increase your visibility. No tech overwhelm, no awkward call DMs, just clear, authentic strategy that works. So download the free LinkedIn to Latte guide below, take the challenge, and start turning your brilliance into real opportunities. Now, back to the episode.
I think this is a great question because, of course, like when all of us are working, we're operating in communities, we're operating within national cultures, we're operating within belief systems, we're operating within global culture. And so in the most generalized sense, I would say that typically in males, we tend to see the the realist and the hero, which is a bit of like, I need to control everything, I need to be on top of everything, and I'm potentially even willing to exclude certain people to ensure that I get the results that I want. And I think that's, those are things we see in media and in pop culture. And again, just as a generalization. And then with women, we tend to see more of the innocent and the saint, which is, I'm just going to take care of everybody. And when I take care of everybody, my worth will be seen. And I'm just going to keep showing up and doing my best. And eventually I'll get my flowers. If I never raise my hand and make myself inconvenient to other people, that will actually be what allows me to grow and allows me to be a success. And those are all distortions, right? Because again, Laura, as you said, like we're all navigating um every single one of these coping mechanisms, and the truth is they worked at some point, right? At some point it worked to be the person early in your career who said, I'm just going to put my head down and work hard, and someone did recognize you. And so that teaches your brain chemistry and your neural pathways to be like, let's keep doing that. We keep getting results from that. Let's keep doing that. That keeps us safe until it doesn't. Right? When your leadership shifts, when the context shifts, when you maybe change roles or change industry, and the people that you're working with or what you're being asked to bring as value as a leader looks different, right? And I think we see this a lot in leaders who, or let's say, people in organizations who get promoted into leadership because they were excellent at being strategic and technical output driven people versus someone who's like, you know what, I might not be the top performer, but my team is sustainable. I've had like zero retention on my team. My team is one of the most creative teams in the organization. And it's sort of like, where are we making that balance for those elements to come together? Because you have organizations that are highly productive and the churn rate is insane. It's just a revolving door of people, right? And even if you are producing in traditional terms, that can still be a very stressful environment where there's constantly new people coming through. And even as a leader, you're trying to attune your leadership to new people all the time. You constantly have people saying, I'm out, I can't sustain this. And so, even if on the external side, you're still hitting certain benchmarks that investors or boards or whoever wants to see, behind the curtain, there is still drain happening, right? And so, particularly for mission driven work, I think there's always going to be this tension when it comes to how much is sustainability us delivering to the best of our ability, and how much is sustainability really thinking down the line of what we want this business to be and the kind of impact we really want to have at the end of the day. And I think that's a constant tension and ebb and flow that forces us to really confront what are the priorities right now and how do we make space for them as leaders.
It's a great conversation, and a lot of our audience is entrepreneurial, so they're the leaders that you're talking to, and these are questions that we can all ask ourselves as leaders, whether we have a massive team and we have lined, middle managers and so forth, various tiers of leadership, or whether we're self leaders. These questions also relate to self leadership. We may just be a team of
Mm-hmm.
one or five or 10.
Yeah.
It's all relevant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
For me, it's
favorite.
about bringing the
Yeah.
human aspect back into business. And that's the thing that's the sweet spot that we like to talk about. Business is about
Mm,
relationships. And the very first relationship that needs to be healthy is the one you have with yourself.
I love that,
Beautifully said.
Biggie. It's so true because they
Mhm.
say like people don't leave jobs, they leave managers. And people need to
Mhm.
recognize how expensive it is to replace someone. When you
Mhm.
have to replace a team member, it's expensive in money and time.
Mhm.
So, how can we be better at retaining? How can we be better about building relationships? How do we be better at being the leaders that others want to follow? And I love you're talking about mission driven because I think mission driven organizations are the ones that are going to survive past this like new revolution we're in right now with AI and
Mhm.
technology that everybody's scared is coming for their jobs. Those that are purpose driven, those that are on missions, those who are thinking differently are the ones who are going to build something better. And we need to
Mhm.
build better businesses. We need to build the businesses that people are going to want to be part of. And the mission is going to be so important to share that, to get out and
Mhm.
talk about that, which is exactly why we host this podcast, because we want to hear the missions that people are on and the businesses that they're building, because this is what we want to inspire other people to do. When you come out and you speak about your mission, other people want to follow. And I'm not
Mhm.
just talking about customers and clients. I'm talking about future employees and partnerships and collaborators, because this is what we're going to need more of to grow the type of world we want to see. And it's going to take a shift in how we do business. And I
Mhm.
think women are poised to do that really well, because we need to build better balanced businesses
Mhm.
that have this built in, where we are having conversations about wellness and health and mental wellness, and is everything aligned with the type of work you're good with at, as well as the type of work you're passionate about? Like, how do we just come into alignment with ourselves and make sure our employees, our staff, our collaborators, our partners are also there? And that's so important to have these conversations today. And I don't think we're doing it enough. I think we need more of it. And yeah, this is such an important, valuable topic. Thank you for sharing it all.
Yeah, thank you both for your interest and your really thoughtful questions around how these pieces intersect. And I mean, business has been very it's been very strategy and technically driven. And Vicky, you just mentioned the importance of the relationship that we have with ourselves. How many of us in childhood or even in higher education were taught to think about or reflect on the relationship we have with ourselves? Most of us, even from childhood, your first relationship is with your parents and your caregiver. And based on the reaction or the response that they had to you, like you're too loud or you're too quiet or you're too this or you're too that, many people, there are threads of that still show up in our leadership because we're still trying to feed that base primal sense of acceptance, right? And so I think it's incredibly powerful when we can start to, yes, we can look at the tangible reality of what it looks like to run a business or create a product or offer a service and all of the metrics and dashboards that come with that. But I also think there are intangibles, even when it comes to strategy, that are connected to our ability to actually sit with our intuition and a knowing that defies what everybody else around us has done. Right? Because like a SWOT analysis would encourage you to be like, go and see what everybody else is doing and then copy that and maybe, tweak 5% of it to make yourself unique. And it's like the true disruptors and innovators are thinking beyond. They are thinking at a leapfrog level. They are thinking about paradigms and methods that we haven't even normalized or thought of, right? And I think we neglect that when we're so ready again to say, what's everybody outside of me doing first and foremost? Because that's the baseline that we anchor ourselves to, right? Instead of allowing ourselves to tap into more creativity, instead of allowing ourselves to actually think more boldly and more in the gray area about what kind of boundaries work for us. And when you start doing that as a business, it's so important to do that as a team, because I've seen many businesses that are very like clear cut about the structure. And then you come inside and people are like, I don't really know what I'm doing. Or, XYZ that we say to clients, that's not what we actually do when we work together. And that disconnect creates a misalignment that, again, that tension will have to be resolved one way or another. And it's kind of up to us whether we want to open the door for that process and engage with it and co-create with it, or whether we we want to have unexpected very challenging things happen where we feel like we have no other choice but to confront things. And we're usually doing that from a place of frustration, from a place of defeat, from a place of even feeling like a failure. And that, again, that colors the entire experience of what we build next. If we're approaching it from a place of lack and negativity versus actually, what if we were proactive? What if we started thinking about opportunities? What if we started chatting with other people in the community who we see are like-minded like we are, and we start to open up pathways? So I think that is sometimes a challenge for leaders in the environment that we operate in today.
It'll come back to you. I am curious, before we wrap up, I'm looking at
Mhm.
the time, but I'm curious, Hawa,
Yeah.
why this line of work is important to you.
Yeah. That's a great question. And honestly, I would say because I'm living it and I'm choosing to ask myself different questions. So I have a background in the humanitarian and development space. And so I worked in Sierra Leone during the Ebola post kind of Ebola crisis in 2015. Um, and then I've also worked in kind of tech readiness jobs for young Africans. And I've worked in these really beautiful spaces, and I've had really incredible opportunities to work closely with leadership in these mission driven social impact spaces. And there was just room for more alignment. There was room for more thoughtfulness, right? And it was like the thoughtfulness that we were giving to the outside world wasn't a thoughtfulness that was being integrated within the organization in order for the organization to continue to build on its mission, right? So if you're in these spaces where there's often a mindset of do no harm because your work is going to impact communities and people, and you're also thinking I want to have an impact that is actually going to move the needle or shift the way that society typically operates or is getting its needs met right now, we really need to bring a level of humility and openness to that work. And in Africa at the moment, there is this interesting tension where there is very much a Silicon Valley startup mentality around social impact businesses. And I started seeing that, and I was like, okay, there are pros and cons to everything. And I can see where the energy and the desire and the momentum to do mission driven work is a very beautiful thing. However, if we are harnessing that energy from a place of wounding, from a place of lack, from a place of perfectionism, from a place of force, then we're actually doing a disservice to ourselves as people who want to further this mission. And in the long run, we may be overlooking some of the services and products that we are actually trying to provide our communities with. And so, with having navigated in spaces like that and having sat in victim mentality myself, having sat in the energy of I'm feeling burned out, I'm anxious, I'm frustrated, I started asking myself, like, where does this come from? Why does this show up? Right. And to give a lot of grace to leaders, nobody, like, there isn't really a playbook or a pathway to follow to discover how to position yourself as a leader, right? And many, like, there isn't really like CEO training for a lot of people or C-suite training for a lot of people. Most people are brought in for their technical expertise because you're good at X, I'm positioning you here, as opposed to being supported to actually gain the skills and the tools to navigate, to actually be able to step outside of the day-to-day details that might be driving your anxiety, to say what is the bigger picture and what we're trying to do, and how can we actually foster and co-create that. So for me, this mission is, it's about Africa, it's about the continent and the growth that we're moving forward with, but it's also about bringing a global perspective to this work, and a perspective that says we can do things in balance and experience abundance. Like, abundance is not just an outcome of force and push, and it's also just not a force of wishful thinking and passivity, right? There's somewhere in that gray area where we get to navigate and co-create and do things that people have never done before, that can allow us to really run businesses that are going to change the world and help humanity. So,
Yeah, I love what you just said there about doing things that other people haven't done before. It is so hard to take that path that isn't paved yet and build something greater. And I think the thing I did want to mention earlier that it came back to me was about being led by values. And when you
Mhm.
start a business focused on values, your value as a leader, your value as an entrepreneur, the value you want to bring, the value you want to have within your team, as well as your greater mission, that you have to step back into your values and remember them and step back into them and go, wait a minute, we started this business because this was important to us. This is, but if we're not doing this for our team, whether that be finding balance or, whatever it is that's important to you, we can often, especially like you said, in mission driven things, we're so focused on helping others and being in that nurturing space and giving, giving, giving. And I think women were really good at this.
Mm-hmm.
But and we forget to take care of ourselves. We forget to give to ourselves. We forget to nurture ourselves. And often women in this, like I'd say in the time of life that I'm in, we've got elderly parents we're worried about, kids
Mm-hmm.
that are growing up and need our attention, and as well as building a business or working with a team. Like, it's a lot, and it could very quickly get overwhelming. And there's going to be this roller coaster of everything in our lives. So it's normal, it's challenging, but there's ways to face it. And I just love going right back to what you said in the beginning. Sometimes we just need to stop,
Mm-hmm.
like, take stock, take a breath, return to our values, return to ourselves, return to our mission, make sure it is still aligned, and then move forward. And it's communication, it's all the beautiful things we talked about today. That's so important. And I'm just so grateful and so blessed to be able to have a partner like Vicky, who just happens to be an awesome coach that helps me. I'm so blessed. I highly recommend that anyone out there who's a leader, you need consultants, you need coaches, you need mentors, you need communities of people that understand the path that you're trying to forge
Mm-hmm.
because they've done their own too. So get in the rooms with the people that can give you that support, because it feels so lonely at the top. Everyone says that, lonely at the top. It's true, because you're often doing things that others haven't yet.
Mm-hmm.
And in like this tech world, like you mentioned, there's so much new, it's always changing and evolving, and it feels so fast and it's hard to keep up with. That's when we need community more. We need to come together more. We need to have conversations like this more.
Mm-hmm.
So we're just not feeling alone. We're just not feeling like it's just me. And maybe we get a little insight to ourselves, what's going on in the world, and then we can get the support that we need so that we can all keep growing and building and doing beautiful things and building better businesses and organizations and other things. So, Howard, I cannot thank you enough. This has been one of my favorite conversations, and you've just been amazing at explaining things so well. We'll, of course, link your information in the show notes if
Mm-hmm.
anyone wants to seek you out and potentially work with you.
Yeah,
Your
thank
your stuff
you.
will be there so them to find. Yeah, just a huge, huge thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. And Laura, just to, I think you said something really beautiful about values. And values used to be the soapbox that I used to, express a lot of these topics about culture and leadership. And, to maybe leave people with one really practical exercise that they can use coming out of this. So you talked about values and how they're used in the business and the mission. I think a really beautiful exercise for people is to sit down with your organizational values and ask yourself, how does that value show up internally? If you know how it shows up internally, great. Document that, solidify it. And if it doesn't show up internally in a way that you like, come up with something. Co create that with your team and start asking, what would we need to stop doing to create space to operationalize this value in the team? And so that could be as simple as, okay, we're going to have a once a week check in as a team. We don't do that right now. We're just constantly on Slack messaging each other all hours of the day. Let's have a meeting once a week where everyone can come and talk about something that they're recognizing another team member for and something that they need help with. Maybe that's a ritual, right? Because it's kind of comfortable to talk about these things as concepts as we have been today, but it's very different when you shift into, okay, I'm carving out an hour a week with the team and we're all going to show up and we're going to do X. And I think that can really start to help with that sense of, okay, we know we do that super well externally for our beneficiaries, our customers, etc. How are we matching that energy within the team so that it fills the team's cup to still go out and put energy into what they do in the external, right? So I really love that you brought that up. So thank you so much, because values operationalization is a huge component to all of this, to go beyond just paying lip service and really say, what are the actions and behaviors that we all agree we want to participate in that help boost our culture and allow us to stay more sustainable and mission driven. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Perfect. Perfect way to end the show. Thank you, Hawa.
Thank you. Thank you both.